Good morning. Good morning. All right, excellent. Thank you for that introduction. I don't know that I would call myself monumental, but I do appreciate that. So I was told that I'm here to talk with you all to get you pumped and excited about the college essay. How many of you have already started to think about the college essay? All right, good. I'm impressed. Great. Well, what I would like to do actually is, I think we have about 30 minutes, and instead of just talking at you for 30 minutes, I really would like to engage in a conversation as much as we can in this big room about what some of your anxieties might be about the college essay, and also maybe even dispel some myths about how you think that people like me use the college essay. Now, the college essay is fresh on my mind because I just mailed thousands of admission decision letters for students that applied to Trinity this year yesterday. So, we have spent the last 5 months really combing through thousands of essays, and in the 18 plus years that I have been working in college admissions, I've read probably hundreds of thousands of essays. So this stuff is really fresh on my mind. And I have to tell you that the college essay, the application essay, is actually my favorite part of the application. And it's my favorite part of the application because it's not statistical, it doesn't give me a number, it doesn't tell me somebody else's opinion about you, in other words, the recommendation letters. It's really the first time that I have the opportunity to get into your brain and to understand what it is that makes you tick. What is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you care about? What are some of the experiences that you've had? This is the opportunity that you have to tell your story. And so the college essay is important, but I do want to help sort of de-stress you a little bit. A college essay isn't going to get you into college, and it's not going to keep you out of college. So this is yet another component that's going to go into your application. You're going to give us your grades, you're going to give us your test scores, unless you apply to test optional institutions. You're going to give it, your counselors are going to write on your behalf, your teachers are going to write on your behalf. So really the goal of the application, my goal when I read an application is when, by the end, when I sort of close it, and I no longer close a file because we read everything online, but when I flip to that last page online, I want to be able to go, I get it. I get who that student is. I get what makes that student tick, what they're passionate about. So as you begin to think about your college essay, and you're going to have a lot of choices because most of you will be using the Common Application to apply to college. And so you'll be sort of shaping your essay based on some of the questions there. And there's about 6 different questions. You have a lot of different areas to choose from. But it's going to give you the opportunity to probably choose something that you're really excited about. And I have to tell you, a great way to begin is as you look at those questions, if you're answering a question that you're having a really hard time even thinking about what the answer might be to that question, you're probably answering the wrong question. You really want to begin by answering the question that resonates the most with you, that you feel like you have something to say. The other thing that I would say is that having worked with students on the college essay for a long time is a lot of you, especially at a school like Choate, where sometimes there's a lot of pressure here to succeed and do your best, a lot of you are going to feel this pressure and think that people like me, college admission officers, want a Pulitzer Prize winning essay, right? We want this thing that we're going to be able to hang up and possibly publish. And the reality of the matter is that's actually not what we're looking for. Yes, you probably want to have your essay looked at by your counselor or teacher to make sure the edits are correct and all of that. But really what we are looking for is to get another piece of the pie in what is your life story. So like I said earlier, we're going to get all the data, the GPAs, the test scores, all that stuff that tells one side of you. We're going to get your counselor's opinion through a recommendation letter, your teacher's opinions. If you interview for the college, we're going to have an opinion of an admissions officer. But this is your opportunity to tell us your story. And the way that I like to sort of describe it to students is that you don't have to have a Pulitzer Prize winning essay. You don't even have to write an essay that is about some extraordinary experience. I think a lot of students believe that, in order to catch an admissions officer's attention, I have to write about trauma or something that I've overcome or saving the rainforest in Costa Rica. You don't have to have these, tremendous experiences. I always like to say that you can write about something ordinary, but you can write about it in an extraordinary way. I'll give you an example. My favorite essay this year was about a student who worked at a coffee shop during the summer. Some would say not so extraordinary. But the way he wrote that essay, I felt like I was in that coffee shop with him. And what he also wrote about was the fact that he learned a lot during that experience in the summer. The theme of his essay was actually about being invisible. He felt like as someone who was in customer service, he was invisible to people. And I just thought, what an amazing way to take an ordinary experience that most people would overlook for a college essay and write about it in an extraordinary way. I was really moved by the essay. We loved his application. And I've read thousands of applications that way. So don't assume, as you're trying to think about a topic, that it has to be, once again, some really extraordinary experience. It could be about something that's very much day-to-day to you, but as long as you take us there and help us understand why this experience is important to you, that's going to really matter. A couple of pitfalls, I would say. The most disappointing essay that I usually read, and I read hundreds of these every single year, is when a student chooses to write about someone that they admire. Maybe it's a historical figure, maybe it's someone in their family, could be grandma. I read a lot of grandma essays. And I love grandma, but in the end I want to admit grandma, I don't want to admit you. Because you haven't really told me about how, this experience or the relationship with the person, if it doesn't tell me anything about you by the end of the essay, then it probably wasn't a very good essay. Remember that the goal of the college essay is for the person who's reading your file to learn something new about you. I read a lot of essays about historical figures like Martin Luther King or, pick your historical figure. But in the end, what I have learned is that the student is really passionate about Martin Luther King. I don't fully understand how has that translated into the student's life. How has that impacted the student's life? What have I learned new from this particular experience? And so you want to make sure that you keep that in the back of your mind as well. So actually, instead of, once again, just talking at you for 30 minutes or so, I'd really like a lot of you around the room raised your hand that you said you've already been thinking about the college essay. Some of you might already even have a draft in the back of your minds. And I spoke to your college counselors and they said that they are going to be working with you on these essays pretty soon. So actually, I'd love to just engage you in a conversation about what is it that you're worried about. If you literally have no idea how to start, I'm happy to talk about that as well. But what's on your mind? And also, I think there's a lot of myths out there about college admissions in general, especially highly selective college admissions and how we use this essay. And so I'm happy to dispel some of those myths or things that you've heard through the rumor mill or in the media as well. So who would like to be the brave soul that asked the first question? Yes?
How do you think to start the process of beginning to cultivate your college essay?
Good question. So how does one begin to start the process of cultivating a college essay? I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. One is really thinking about what might be some of the things that I'm really passionate about or that I really care about. Or, if that's not sort of the angle that you want to take with your essay, what have been some of the experiences that I have had in my life that are transformative? I think those tend to be, two very different sort of topics. Or what has been what has had a significant impact in my life, or who has had a significant impact in my life. And once again, focusing not just on the who, but on what that impact actually was and how you might be different as a result of it. I also have to say, having conversations, you guys all have an amazing college counseling team here. It's one of the great reasons you came to Choate. Just having a conversation, like an exploration conversation. I worked as a high school counselor at a public school in New York City for a couple of years, and I used to love when students would come to me and they're like, Mr. Perez, I don't have anything to write about. My life is pretty dull. And what I would do with them is just sometimes literally go through a day in their life. Or for those of you who, are not from the local area and maybe just go home, a day in your summer or a day when you're back at home, and inevitably something extraordinary that you think is just your regular normal day pops up. I'll give you an example, even though this is a bit extreme. I was sitting with one student who was saying to me, life is pretty boring. I come to school, I do my homework, I go home, I get on the boat. And I was like, wait, get on the boat? What are you talking about? Come to find out, this student lived on Ellis Island in New York. And his father was the caretaker of the Statue of Liberty. He never thought about it twice, because guess what? That's his day-to-day. He gets on the employee boat, he comes over to the mainland, goes to high school, gets back on the boat, and goes home. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's like gold in terms of college admissions, right? So a little extreme, but I guarantee you there are things that you think are just day-to-day in your life, because it's your life, right? We all live in our reality. There was another student, I keep using New York City examples because that's where I worked, but there was a kid who woke up several days a week and took a massive surfboard on the A train all the way to Far Rockaway and went surfing because he loved surfing. This is not could you picture, for those of you that know New York, like a massive surfboard on the A train? Like, he was so determined, right? That says a lot about passion, determination, all these kinds of things. He just overlooked it. I just said, give me a typical morning for you. And this came up. So what I would say is you probably want to have, if not with your college counselor, but maybe even with some of your friends, have little groups where you're all sitting around and just talking about typical days, not just here at Choate, but also maybe at home. That's a great way to sort of just get started in having a little bit of a focus group to a certain extent. Other questions? Yes?
I think a common worry among students writing their essays is that that it has to be really long, or that if it's long enough, once they finish it, you just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So the question is about length, right? A lot of people worry that it has to be really long. Well, here's the great news. The great news is it doesn't have to be really long, and we actually prefer if it's not. Now, in the beginning, when you're first going through your editing stages, maybe it is good to start long, right? And you will, with the help of your college counselors and teachers, you'll begin to narrow down the essay. But the reality of the matter is most essays that I read are not more than a page long. And they're actually, in the Common Application, a lot of colleges will actually put a word count. In general, is it? I'm looking over at Marsha. Is there like a cutoff at some point?
Yeah, most give you. You'll all know word count.
Yeah, there's going to be a word count. So that's a good thing because, to a certain extent, for students who are quite verbose and they do like to write a lot and go on and on and on, this is a great exercise in becoming concise and really think about what is the actual message that I want to send to the admissions office. And if you're applying to institutions directly and they don't have a word count, I can tell, I always say to students, please be kind to us. We read thousands and thousands of essays. We actually don't have time to read a 4-page essay. We don't, right? So a 1-page, really well-written, concise essay is actually going to work much better in your favor because we're not digging through pages and pages of things to try to get to the point. Other questions? Come on, I just admitted several students from Choate this year. I know how curious and intellectual you all are. Okay, great.
Does it have to be an essay, or what if you do something like crazy with like a poem, like a recipe?
That's a great question. So does it have to be an essay? What if you do something and you said crazy, like a poem or a recipe? And I would say, that's probably a conversation you want to have with your college counselor based on what college you are applying to. I think for some schools, They would welcome that. They would think that's actually really cool, different. It might very much represent their process. And at other schools, I might think that's a bit of a risk. And so I think having that conversation, there are some schools who just say, these are the instructions, stick to the program, folks, stick to the word count. But the other thing that I would say is, if a college is going to deny you because of, some level of creativity, so on and so forth, maybe that wasn't the right fit for you, right? So, but I would say, in general, you might want to check in with your counselors and maybe do a comparison between what schools you're actually applying to and which schools might sort of be open to that idea. And I think a lot of schools would. I've actually seen the poems and the recipes. Other questions? Yes?
In terms of like percentages, how much weight do you think a college essay actually carries in terms of an applicant?
So the question is how much weight and in terms of percentages do we give to an essay? And the answer is, I can't give you a percentage. I would say that it's sort of looked at evenly across the board in terms of, your high school transcript, the rigor of your curriculum here at Choate, your essays included, your recommendation letters, interviews, so on and so forth. It probably counts somewhat evenly. I mean, the first thing, if you're sort of worried, the first thing we're going to look at is going to be your high school transcript. You've been in high school for 4 years, or will be by the time you apply. And so we want to know, what have you done academically here at Choate? How have you chosen to challenge yourself? What kinds of courses have you taken? And then the rest of the stuff that you're going to provide to the application is going to help provide context for that very important piece of the application. The way to think about it is most of the colleges that all of you are going to apply to are highly residential places. And so you are going to be living on our college campuses, right? At Trinity, everybody lives on campus. And so part of my job is not just to figure out who can do the work here, who deserves a spot, who has challenged themselves academically. That's only a part of your experience on a college campus. The other big part of my job is, what is the student going to contribute to our community? What is the student going to bring socially, extracurricularly? What kind of issues will they get involved in? How will they move this community forward? That's where the essay comes in. That's where the extracurricular activities come in. And so we pay very close attention to those things and try to give it equal weight, because obviously the academics come first, but a very powerful piece of it is also who you are as a person. And part of it is also that I'm trying to build a diverse community, right? I don't want everyone in my community coming from the same part of the country or from the same country for that matter. It would be a little boring if the entire class was made up of, jazz pianists, right? I want to make sure that I have a nice mix of people who are interested in the arts and people who are interested in music and the social sciences and so on and so forth. So that's where the essay and what you write about is critical. It's hard for me to sort of see from up here. I know there's hands. Yes?
Hi, can you tell us more about the sort of cliche essays that you get and how we can win that?
Cliche essays, grandma, cliche essay. I talked about that one already. And once again, let me contextualize that. Grandma with no lesson learned or me learning something about you. It's a bit of a risk to talk about this, but I'm going to because I do feel passionately about it. You also have to really think about what are some of the experiences that you have had, and how does maybe having had the resources to do some of those experiences impact, right? And so I read essays from wealthy families sometimes of, these big trips that they've taken around the world, so on and so forth. And so that's a little bit of a tricky double-edged sword to make sure that if it was a really impactful experience for you, you've learned something from it, there was an educational experience there, by all means, absolutely write about that. But one of the questions also to think about is, how does my own background and sometimes privilege really play into that kind of essay? So that could be a little bit of a tricky sword. You know, I joke and I use the example, you know, going to save the rainforest in Costa Rica. I read a lot of essays like that, students usually from very wealthy backgrounds who have the opportunity to go down and do a 1-week trip and do that. And so part of what you might want to think about is, how transformative was that? How meaningful was that? If it really was truly meaningful for you and it's coming from a very genuine place, then that's what you want to write about. But if not, you might want to be a little bit careful. Yes?
What ways during the essay writing process do we check ourselves, make sure we're being original enough?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking me that, because there was a point I wanted to make in pitfalls. I think it is important to get your essay edited. You know, all of us, I was just this morning writing an email to the Trinity community, and I had 2 other people edit it for me just to make sure, you know, there's some things that you look at so often that you no longer can see the mistakes in it anymore. However, I think there is a danger for high school students who are writing the college essay to lose their voice along the way because it's been edited by so many people. You know, if you choose 1 or 2 people that you really trust to take your essay and to be able to give you back some feedback, but I would not say give it to 5, 6, 7, 8 people. After a while, you're going to start losing your voice. You know, someone once told me, you want to write an essay that if someone picked it up off the copy machine and didn't know whose this was, they would know that it's you. If you're reading your essay and you're feeling like, gosh, this doesn't even sound like me anymore, you've run into a pitfall, and you probably should, you know, revert back a little bit. Yes?
So this is, I guess, more about the college admissions process as a whole, but
Yep.
does one admissions officer generally review all the components of a student's application, or does it get shuffled around?
Great question. So this is more about the general admissions process. Does one admission officer in particular take a look at the application, at the essay, or does it get sort of shuffled around? I think it depends on the institution, but for the most part, I would say at highly selective institutions across the country, there's going to be more than one person who reads the file. The first person who reads the file tends to be the person who represents the area where you go to high school. So, you know, a lot of you in the fall are going to meet a lot of admission officers who come here to Choate to give a little talk about their school. That's probably going to be the person who reads the file. And so just keep that in the back of your mind. But we like checks and balances in admissions offices, you know, because I might have a bias about something, or my colleague might have a bias about something, or I might be tired on the day that I read your application and I miss something. And so it's always good to have another person. So at a minimum, most colleges have 2 readers for a little check and balance. And then at small liberal arts colleges where I have worked most of my career, we also have an admissions committee, and people get into a room, and after those 2 reads are done, they talk about every single applicant and sort of bring that applicant to life. So there is a possibility that your file will be reviewed a minimum of 2 times, but sometimes it could be 3, 4, 5 times before we make a decision. Yes?
This might be a little specific, but you said it's good to write about like transformation when you're an actress, but can you also write about like your weakness or something you want to overcome?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so the question was, I talked about transformation, and I'm not saying you should all go write an essay about transformation, but I was using it as an example. So the question was, can you also write about a weakness in something that you have overcome or want to overcome? And I think the answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, I'm very cognizant that most people that are writing an essay for admission to my institution are like 17 and 18 years old. You are not perfectly formed. You know, none of us are, even in older age. And, you know, I do think it says a lot about a student when they're willing to acknowledge a particular weakness and how they may have worked on it, overcome it, or are working to overcome it. That could be a really powerful essay. If you're raising your hand, raise it really high, because it's hard for me to sort of see from up here. Yes?
Would you briefly describe the supplement essay and the role that it plays in the admission
review process?
Yes. So there is going to be the personal essay that you write, and that's the essay that you're probably going to send to most colleges. And if you're on the Common Application, that's the essay that you could send to all the schools that are on the Common App. That essay tends to be very specific about you. But then there are also supplemental essays. And these are actually really important, and I have to tell you, this is one of the pitfalls because a lot of students wait until the last minute to do these essays because they're working so hard on the application and they want to get that beautiful, perfect personal essay to us. And then they sort of say, oh, right, I forgot, Trinity also has a supplemental essay. Let me throw a couple sentences together and zap that over. Those essays are absolutely critical because with, 3,500 plus colleges and universities in the country, one of the questions that I ask myself when I am reading a file is, how much does the student really want to come to a place like Trinity? Now, I can never be guaranteed whether you're interested or not, but if you sort of blow off that essay or you don't do a really good job conveying why you might want to be at that institution, that could be a downfall for the student. I would also say, you need to figure out whether or not the colleges you are applying to require a supplemental essay, whether they make it optional. I think it's important to, I'm getting the 3-minute warning here. I think it's important to make sure that you have a conversation with your college counselor about the schools that you're applying to, and if they make it optional, whether it really is optional. I'll give you the example at Trinity. Our essay is technically optional, but when a student doesn't write the essay, I have a really hard time moving beyond that. Because I wonder, okay, how much do you really want to be here if you didn't take the time to answer the question about why us? So it's something really to think about. And my biggest piece of advice around the supplemental essay would be, you want to make sure you leave yourself enough time and room in the process to answer those questions and to reflect on what you might want to write about, because you can't cut and paste those essays. Those have to be pretty individualized. Okay, last question, yes?
How does knowing an applicant goes to say Choate change your perspective?
So how does knowing that an applicant goes to Choate change my perspective? That's a great question.
Or any other
or any other school, for that matter. The way that we read applications is by territory. So if I was the person that visits Choate, then it is my job to get to know Choate, to understand the rigor of this curriculum, to get to know your high school counselors, so that when I'm reading the application, I'm really well informed about what a particular course here means, what different students who applied, what kind of rigor they have. So I wouldn't say that it changes my perspective, but what it does is it informs me about the kinds of student the kind of student that might be showing up on my campus if I were to admit them from a place like Choate. What we don't do is sort of compare apples and oranges, right? So I don't take applications from Choate and sit them right next to the magnet school down the street and go, okay, which one should we take? It's not really the way it works. We evaluate you based on the context of where you went to high school, and it's my job to understand that context. Do we have time for one more? Or okay, we do have time for one more. The real last question this time. Last question. Before you all have to go off and write that essay. Okay, I think I've depressed them enough. They're all yours now. Thank you so much. Good luck to you.